Stu at home for joining us this hour. At the end of last night's show, you might remember we were counting down to a midnight deadline that had been given to the Trump administration by a federal judge. A judge had ordered the Trump administration to restart funding on foreign aid. Now, this is a judge who had previously ordered the Trump administration to restart that funding, and they had not. He had then brought Trump administration lawyers back into his courtroom this week and said, it doesn't seem like you're complying with my earlier order. Can you tell me what steps are being taken to comply with my order? The Trump administration lawyer then responded by basically going, hamana, 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 hamana. The judge at that point, we got the transcript, actually. The judge at that point said, quote, "Hey, I guess I'm not sure why I can't get a straight answer from you on this." Hey. After that just humiliation of the Trump administration's lawyer unable to explain why the Trump administration was defying this lawful order, that judge issued what's called a motion to enforce. And he set this midnight deadline for midnight last night by which the Trump administration had to do what he said, had to restart that aid funding. So that's what we were talking about last night at the top of the show. And then just as we were going off the air at the end of the show last night, the Trump administration ran to the U.S. Supreme Court. And just before we went off the air, just before the end of last night's show, the Trump administration obtained an order from the Supreme Court saving them from that midnight deadline. Right? So they're less than 3 hours away from that deadline, and the Supreme Court at the very last second steps in and says, no, 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 Trump administration, you don't have to release that funding by midnight after all. And we want briefing on this by noon on Friday. So we'll see what happens by noon on Friday, by tomorrow noon at the U.S. Supreme Court. But because of the Supreme Court's intervention, that USAID funding did not start flowing last night at midnight. And this confrontation in this series of events raises like a whole Niagara Falls of issues and consequences. I mean, first of all, and most importantly, it's the substance of it, right? I mean, what's that funding for? Well, among other things, it's for the magnificently successful, world-renowned U.S. AIDS treatment programs that have been interrupted. That puts tens of millions of lives at risk. With that funding not flowing, those programs aren't restarting. The new work that is not being done because that funding hasn't restarted includes little things like, I don't know, work on the previously unknown brand new hemorrhagic fever that has just broken out in Congo. It killed 3 little kids in Congo over the course of 3 days, and then immediately within like 10 more days, the death toll was 53. And now it's in at least 2 different locations in Congo, and they don't know what it is or how it spreads. It is a disease they have never seen before. It does seem to have an alarmingly high death rate, something like a 12% death rate, which for a hemorrhagic fever, an infectious disease, is a massive death rate. And even scarier than that, those it kills, it seems to kill within 48 hours. Right? This is bad. An outbreak spreading fast of a previously undiscovered, unknown hemorrhagic fever that is already killing humans by the dozens. That's the kind of thing that United States global health programs would be all over, usually, to identify this thing, to contain it, to treat people and keep them alive, to stop this thing from spreading, among other things, to make sure that it does not come here to the United States. But we're not doing the foreign aid funding anymore. Stopping USAID means stopping efforts to combat things like that. It also means, you know, stopping America's traditional and leading and totally irreplaceable work to help and contain the damage when not just hemorrhagic fevers break out, like Ebola in Uganda and Marburg in Tanzania, both of which are happening right now, but also to stop things like tuberculosis and malaria. Domestically, here in this country, this confrontation, this drama with the Supreme Court getting involved means that we are about to have the U.S. Supreme Court meaningfully weigh in on this sledgehammer that Trump and his top campaign donor have taken to the U.S. government thus far, with no seeming regard for either the law or the Constitution. So we will see, probably for the first time, how the Supreme Court is oriented toward this radical change that has happened over the last 5.5 weeks in our country. And honestly, this is also important because of the way this came up. That midnight deadline we were looking at last night was set so firmly and so urgently by the federal judge who was hearing this case because he had to do it by motion to enforce. He had to do a motion to enforce because Trump really was ignoring that court's previous orders. Right? And so when we look to see how the Supreme Court handles this tomorrow at noon, we're going to be looking to see how the Supreme Court handles that very scary issue. How this Supreme Court is going to treat the prospect of this president, this administration, potentially ignoring the courts. They have been joking about this and making, macho-sounding bluffs about this for a long time now, particularly from the Vice President, J.D. Vance. How is the Supreme Court going to deal with it now that it's real? Do they try to give him what he wants from the courts so that Trump doesn't break that glass, doesn't, smash through the brightest bright line that we have and effectively end the republic? Do they appease him because he's so scary, we better not make him defy a court order, we better make sure all court orders go his way? Or do they make clear to him that his powers as president actually don't allow him to defy the courts? To tell him that he's not always going to get what he wants from the courts. And when the courts tell him something he doesn't like, he has to obey the courts anyway. Do they tell him that if he does try to defy the courts, he is effectively declaring war on the United States of America? We'll see. We don't know how the U.S. Supreme Court is going to handle this. And we don't know how directly they're going to get at this key issue, but this case moves to them tomorrow at noon Eastern time. So eyes wide open on that and take it with all the seriousness it deserves. We've got the top Senate Democrat on the Judiciary Committee here tonight to talk about what happened yesterday in the Senate when Trump nominees for senior Justice Department positions told him and other members of the Judiciary Committee that they weren't sure that Trump should always obey court rulings. That happened in the Senate yesterday. The leading Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to be here talking with us about it in just a moment, ahead of tomorrow's Supreme Court actions on this case. It's a very chilling subject. It's one I take very seriously. It is absolutely the endgame discussion for us as a republic. It is as serious as it gets. Meanwhile, this is what it looked like in Washington, D.C. today as workers from that agency, from USAID, were each given a grand total of 15 minutes by the Trump administration to come into USAID headquarters and retrieve their belongings from their offices. While they were doing that, people showed up in big numbers to support them and clap for them and to say thank you.
Oh, there's so many emotions. I already cried this morning when I arrived. Someone said, thanks for being here, and I just burst into tears.
Thank you. We're here. We thank you. This is not happening in the dark.
That was Washington, D.C. today as people showed up to support and thank USAID workers who the Trump administration is trying to fire as they try to shut down that agency, even though they pretty clearly are just legally not allowed to do that. People turning out to protest, but also support the people who are at the sharp end of this stick. One of the tools the Trump administration has been using to try to destroy USAID and to disassemble so many other agencies is wholesale firing, en masse firing, everybody who's considered a probationary employee. And you've heard that term over this last couple of weeks when they have been using this as the basis for firing people. Being a probationary employee, it usually means you're in your first year or two on the job. it can also mean that you've transferred into a new job or you've been promoted within the last year or two. Probationary makes it sound like you've been in trouble, right? And you're like, you're on probation, we're watching you because you did something wrong. It's not that at all. It is a meaningless category in terms of the importance of the work that's being done by that employee, their skill level, their performance, their value to the government and to their agency. But nevertheless, the Trump administration has ordered mass firings of people based purely on that classification, just because they thought it would be easy to get away with that, legally speaking. Turns out, not so fast. Tonight, a federal judge on the West Coast, a federal judge in California, has just ruled that the Trump administration's instructions to agencies about indiscriminately firing all these people, thousands and thousands of probationary employees thus far. A judge just ruled tonight that the instruction from the Trump administration to all the agencies about firing these people is, quote, illegal and, quote, should be stopped, rescinded. Federal Judge William Alsup said from the bench in his ruling tonight, quote, the Office of Personnel Management does not have any authority whatsoever under any statute in the history of the universe to hire and fire employees within another agency. He said, quote, it can hire its own employees, yes, can fire them, but it cannot order or direct some other agency to do so. Judge Alsup further ordered tonight from the bench that the rescinding of the Trump administration directive to fire probationary employees, he ordered that the rescinding of that directive should be conveyed tonight to the Pentagon, to the U.S. Defense Department. And I think that's because tomorrow is the day on which the Pentagon was otherwise expected to march more than 5,000 fired employees out the door. Well, again, the judge said the Defense Department needs to be informed of my ruling tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. So whether or not they still try to fire those 5,000 plus employees tomorrow at Defense Department, it may not happen because of this judge's order. We shall see. We don't think that this order from this judge tonight means that all the other probationary employees who have already been fired are going to be reinstated. We don't think that's the implication of this ruling, but we're going to have to wait to see his written order in this case, which we expect tomorrow. Again, he ruled from the bench tonight. He ordered that his ruling from the bench be conveyed to the Pentagon, but we expect his written ruling tomorrow. Today, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which, among other things, gives us, you know, the weather forecast, they sent out notices today that they are indiscriminately firing hundreds of employees from that agency. The Trump administration also today announced plans to close hundreds of help centers, places people can go to get free help and advice on their taxes. Oh, good. These are the so-called taxpayer assistance centers. They're going to close 110 of those all around the country. Yeah, can't possibly have taxpayer assistance. That announcement comes as the IRS was told to fire more than 6,000 people this past week, just as tax filing season is getting underway. We're also going to be talking tonight with a reporter on VA issues tonight. Trump has just fired more than 2,000 people from the VA, from the agency that serves our nation's veterans, including people who work to support the Veterans Crisis Line. Yeah, there's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse there, huh? Got to cut that. Trump also cut funding for veterans' cancer care. Seriously? And for veterans' cemeteries. Seriously. Before good journalism about those cuts and a resulting huge outcry yesterday forced them to reinstate some of those things, but they did try to cut them. We'll have more on that coming up tonight. But these cuts that I'm talking about, the impact of these cuts that I'm talking about, the legal fight over these cuts, but also the pushback against these cuts and what they're doing, it's not at all a Washington story by now. It really is by now everywhere.
One of the places where we've already seen impacts from those federal cuts is right here at the Detroit VA. On a day that would have been his one-year work anniversary at the Detroit VA.
When I first got that email, I was shocked, quite frankly shocked.
Elliot Spray is instead unemployed. The 10-point veteran, one of the thousands of federal employees terminated in the last few weeks as the Trump administration and the Department of Government Efficiency work to slash what they say is government waste. A rally in Livonia Tuesday bringing out dozens of seniors concerned about Social Security and Medicare.
I'm terrified. My life would change drastically without Social Security, and that's our money. We put that in. Nobody gave us that money. We loaned it to the government.
Everything that is happening right now is impacting so many people.
Delia Sharp in the crowd after losing her job on Friday when the Department of Education grant she was hired under was terminated.
Department of Education cuts, the potential elimination of the Department of Education is one of sort of two categories of actions the Trump administration and Republicans in Washington are taking that have potentially catastrophic effects, not just on the people who are served by those agencies or the people who work there, but also on the states. If the federal education department disappears, which NBC News reports is their plan to just eliminate that department and everything it does, if they kill the federal education department, and if they go ahead with these massive Medicaid cuts that are slated in the budget that Republicans have just started to pass in Washington, both of those things are going to just be nuclear bombs on the state budgets of just about every state in the country. Those folks in Michigan on Tuesday, including the woman who's just lost her job because of Department of Education cuts, they were protesting, among other things, what Trump is doing to Social Security. They protested outside the Social Security Administration building. Reporters this week, including Dave Dayen at the American Prospect, have warned that Trump's cuts at the Social Security Administration might be fully 50% of the workforce at Social Security. Meanwhile, the expected cuts to Medicaid, which again would be devastating not just to the people who work to administer that, would be devastating to the tens of millions of people who get Medicaid in this country. It'd be devastating to state budgets in every state in this country. The expected cuts to Medicaid specifically led to this protest yesterday in Wisconsin.
Many of those who gathered on Wednesday,
it just goes on and on,
came with stories.
I have a 23-year-old son who has developmental disabilities. He has been on Medicaid since he was a toddler.
And photos.
I think people need to see that there are real people being impacted.
Telling how Medicaid has affected their lives.
You may have not been able to receive those therapies without it.
They believe the budget plan approved by the House of Representatives on Tuesday means cuts to Medicaid.
Medicaid is an essential program for these folks, and we cannot let it be cut.
They need to listen to the people.
The Wisconsin Department of Health and Human Services reported 1.47 million Wisconsinites were enrolled in Medicaid in 2023.
Heartbreaking to see how many people are going to be affected.
Senator Johnson did not appear in person, but said in a statement the rally has, quote, no basis in truth or fact.
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin never misses an opportunity to share how much he respects his constituents. Has no basis in truth or fact. Yeah, these dummies with their disabled children rallying at his office. He doesn't see the need to respond. They don't know anything. You might have seen the headline in the Washington Post yesterday about how the, quote, resistance is beginning to, quote, wake in earnest. Post highlighted, among other things, the fact that Senator Bernie Sanders just held a couple of town hall events in two red states, in Iowa, where he went to Iowa City, and in Nebraska, where he held an event in Omaha. You can see from some of the local news coverage and the footage we've been able to get that these events were sort of stuffed to the gills and beyond. In Omaha, the organizers of that town hall event with Senator Sanders said they had an inkling that the response was going to be pretty big, so they arranged for a really big venue for his event. They planned for 1,000 people to show up. They got a venue that seated 1,000 people. On the night of the event, though, the actual turnout was between 3,500 and 4,000 people in Nebraska in February to go to a meeting with Bernie Sanders. In Iowa City, his talk there was at noontime. The Des Moines Register reports that thousands of people turned up in Iowa City. They started lining up at 7:30 a.m. for an event that wouldn't start until noon. Des Moines Register reports that lines to get in stretched multiple city blocks, and they had to set up a whole separate overflow event. In Iowa, in February, to go to a noontime meeting with Bernie Sanders. And this is not just a Bernie Sanders phenomenon. This, for example, was the no special occasion regular organizing meeting last night for the Indivisible chapter in Collingswood, New Jersey.
Duck Walk by Ariel Williams. Henrietta Wilkins rushes to church one Sunday morning, accidentally leaving her gate open. Her duck, Duckweisha, seizes the chance to take her 5 ducklings to the local pond. Along the way, the ducklings fall into a manhole, causing a town-wide rescue effort. After a frantic search, Duckweisha finds her ducklings safely swimming in the pond, and the heartwarming story makes local news. Meanwhile, Henrietta realizes her mistake and panics, but the firemen reunite her with Duckweisha and her ducklings, bringing a happy ending to their adventure.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
The Terms and Conditions of a King, A New Beginning. Ariel, with her young daughter Jasmine, walked into the optical lens store one day to find King being verbally attacked by his coworkers. Witnessing this harsh treatment, Ariel immediately felt a deep sense of sympathy and concern for King. She stepped in, offering support, which forged a strong bond of friendship between them. Over time, as their friendship blossomed, they began to share their personal lives and struggles. Eventually, they both discovered something astonishing. They had been connected for much longer than either realized. They had been meeting in a shared dreamscape, where they had formed a deep, unspoken connection. Ariel had been there to comfort King in a difficult time, offering him advice, unaware that their paths would eventually cross in the waking world. This revelation deepened their bond, and they began to explore not only their growing friendship but also the strange, mystical connection they shared through their dreams.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
Sable's Song, A Siren's Journey to Joy. Once upon a time, in a small, worn-out town in Middle America, there lived a little child named Sable. Worn into poverty, Sable's body was frail, so thin that you could see her bones, but her heart was filled with an exuberance that not even hunger could dull. Sable was awkward, with dark, deep-set eyes that sparkled with innocence and wonder. Despite being born a boy, Sable always knew she was different. Inside her lived a girl, bright and effervescent, waiting to bloom.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.
The Dreamer's Crystal Ball. Somewhere in Springfield, Ohio, a little Haitian migrant girl and her mother had just picked fresh berries, nuts, dates, and fruits for the elders of the town. With the money they earned, they eagerly headed to the grocery market, planning to buy vegetables for a hearty deer stew the mother was preparing for that night. But when they arrived, a chaotic scene greeted them.
Get your digital copy today at lulubooks.com and experience the adventure in EPUB or PDF format. Make sure you have a compatible reader to dive into this unforgettable journey. Don't miss out, unlock the secrets, and let the story begin.